Alright, I'd just like to give a warning on this. This video is going to be a bit of a rambler. I don't really have a script or anything, so if you're not into that, feel free to click off the video. Also, I would like to issue a full-blown spoiler warning for both the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and the book Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, as there's really no way for me to fully talk about this without spoiling the absolute hell out of everything. So yeah, if you haven't seen or read the book or the movie and you want to, feel free to click off the video now to save yourself from being spoiled. So Quentin Tarantino wrote a book, and it just so happens to be a novelization of his most recent film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and that film just so happens to be my favorite of Quentin Tarantino. So yeah, I guess you could say I was really looking forward to this book. I loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when I saw it in theaters. I've seen it several times since then, and frankly, I think it will always be my favorite Tarantino film, just for the pure attention to detail in the period, and then the characters are the most fleshed out characters Tarantino's ever written. I just absolutely love that movie to pieces. So yeah, if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. Please check it out. It's a great movie. The book, however, it does a lot of things kind of goofy. So I think that this gets a lot of things really right and a few things pretty wrong, which we'll talk about, because the rights are really cool and then the wrongs are so catastrophically wrong that it made me, well, I don't know. I don't quite know how it made me, but, you know, I guess we'll get into that. So I'm going to start this off by answering a few questions that I'm sure a lot of people had when they found out that Tarantino was novelizing Once Upon a Time, and one of them is, does it flesh out the story? Yes, it absolutely does. A solid 40 to 50% of the book is entirely new content that was not seen in the movie. And as a result, this felt like a very refreshing read. It didn't really feel like I was just reading the movie. It felt like a brand new companion piece to the film. It's still very heavily connected, but it's not entirely just a reproduction. And while there are definitely scenes and chapters in the book that are like that, I do think that Tarantino still gets the chance to add a lot in terms of inner monologue, prose. It definitely fleshes out the experience a lot more, which is insane because Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is already an incredibly immersive experience as a film. Yes, the book is incredibly immersive in the period, from both the content and the look of it. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at this thing. It's beautiful. It's like an old pulp novel from the 70s, and that's definitely what he was going for. All in all, I guess I liked the book. I can't say that I hated it. I can't even really say that I disliked it, but what I can say is that there were some severe miscalculations in Tarantino's writing, and okay, well, let me talk about that. Writing a book is obviously very different than writing a movie. I mean, you kind of have to approach it very differently, and you also have to inject much more of yourself into the piece. With a film, it's much more reliant on the actors and the setting. It's a very visual experience. Books are entirely words, and you have to depict absolutely everything that you want to depict with just a few sentences. And while that can often be amazing in the case of some writers, others, it's not so much the case. And with Tarantino, that's definitely the case. And that's easy to be forgiven. It is, after all, his first novel. But the prose sometimes leaves a lot to be desired. Being written in present tense, it feels like I'm reading a screenplay. Am I saying that I wish it could have just been written better? Sure, I guess I am saying that, but that does not deter from the actual quality of the content in the book. I do think that if Tarantino had postponed this to later in his authorial career, because obviously, like I said, this is his first published novel, maybe that would have been different, but I simply don't know. Another thing that comes across quite obviously in books as opposed to films is the author's ideals. And that happens quite a bit in the book, for better or for worse. Okay, so it's impossible for me to talk about this without getting into specifics. There is a point of contention in the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where it is left up to debate as to whether or not Brad Pitt's character, Cliff Booth, murdered his wife. And the book doesn't like beating around the bush before the scene even happens. It just says, yeah, he murdered his fucking wife. And you know what, that's all well and good, I guess. That's whatever. It's problematic. That's about the best thing that I can say. So the way the scene goes is Cliff and his wife Bonnie are hanging out on his boat when Bonnie starts arguing with him, starts yelling at him, and Cliff, holding a shark gun, either misfires or intentionally murders his wife. The book goes into graphic detail to describe that the harpoon cut his wife in half, and Cliff then spent 6 or 7 hours holding the two pieces of his wife together until the Coast Guard could come. It's a very gruesome scene, it's a very disturbing scene, and it's all well and good until Tarantino makes the rash decision to start defending him. Defending Cliff for murdering his wife. Now, it doesn't exactly do that. It does give some moral ambiguity there. Was it an accident or was it intentional? Was it a twitch of the finger or did he pull the trigger? And that's all fine. Those two, that sort of dilemma is whatever, and that leaves it open to the reader. But then Quentin goes on a bit of a tangent that I cannot explain without reading to you directly. So, it wasn't like anybody was gonna miss Billy Booth. She was a fucking c***. Did she deserve to be ripped in two? Maybe not, but to say without Billy Booth on this earth the sweet life goes on unabated would be an understatement. That's fucked up, right? I surely cannot be the only one that thinks that. That is a fucked up thing to write and a fucked up thing to say. Now, if it were from the point of view of the character Cliff, then maybe, just maybe, I could forgive it for being, you know, a character. I mean, characters have different viewpoints. Characters are allowed to say crude and ridiculous shit. Look at every character in a Stephen King novel, for example. I don't think that reflects his real viewpoints. I don't think that reflects how he thinks about his characters. That's just how the characters think. However, with this, it's written directly in the third-person narration, not from this viewpoint of any character, and it just ends up looking like Quentin wants people to root for Cliff to tear his wife in half. That's really only the tip of the iceberg here. I mean, it's far down the iceberg, but in the grand scheme of things, it's the tip, because women are portrayed in a very problematic way in this book. It's sort of there in the film, although I think that veers more on the side of respect, because obviously depicting Sharon Tate in a film, you have to tread a very fine line, because that was a real person who was tragically murdered, so you just have to walk a fine line on what's respectful and what isn't. And Tarantino worked very closely with the family of Sharon Tate as he was writing and directing the film, so it makes a lot of sense why Sharon Tate was portrayed like that in the film. In the book, however, it doesn't seem like he had that same sort of cooperation with the family. It seems like he was just sort of doing whatever the fuck he wanted. Just about every female character is hypersexualized to the point where it's kind of grotesque to read at times. Not one female character can walk down the street without Cliff or Rick or the narrator admiring how big their boobs are, how fat their asses are, or how good they look in those tight-cut shirts, or how much Cliff would really want her to suck his dick. All in all, I have a lot of problems separating the art from the artist in this case, because Quentin Tarantino is through and through an auteur. It's the same thing with Lars von Trier. I mean, in Nymphomaniac, I see a character defending Hitler and defending pedophiles, yet I don't see the character defending him. I see Lars von Trier defending him, because the work is so personal. The work is so much a work of direct vision that I can't help but think that the filmmaker is just pumping his own thoughts into his script. And it's the same thing with this. I mean, if Quentin Tarantino is the type of person to walk down the street and just think about how much he wants to fuck every girl that he sees, I mean, well, I wouldn't be surprised, but the amount of borderline delusion it takes to just put all that into a book, I don't know, it's like Atlas Shrugged levels of, you know what I'm saying? It's just really... Another thing that I quite obviously have to mention is Tarantino's ego. Now, it's quite obvious that he has one if you watch any one of his movies, because they are very self-important, very dependent on pretty clunky dialogue, if I'm being perfectly honest. And overall, I said this with Bohemian Rhapsody, and I think it can be forgiven with Tarantino, because 9 times out of 10 what he makes is pretty damn good. His films have a bit of an insistence upon itself that you're watching something great, that you're watching a movie that's like, you know, ooh, it's an event, it's the new Tarantino film, and that can get pretty annoying. But with this book, it is ever so more present than with anything Tarantino has ever made, to the point where, spoiler alert, big spoiler alert, you don't want to hear this if you haven't read the book and you want to, Tarantino exists within his own cinematic universe. And that was pretty weird. I mean, part of me thinks it was just like a cute little touch, you know, like, oh, Tarantino, he's gonna add himself in there, write himself in. Hopefully he never becomes a parent, although who knows, maybe he'll pull a full-on Dark Tower and just go full fucking meta, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case. With this, it just seems like he was plugging himself in because he could, because he wanted to write his own name. And the way that he implements himself, it's not like an offensive way that he does it or anything. Basically, he mentions that he eventually writes and directs movies in the mid-90s. And one of the actors, specifically the child actress featured in the Lancer pilot, goes on to star in a Tarantino film and gets nominated for an Oscar. That's the first reference. Now, the second reference is a little unclear. I mean, he could have meant anybody, but frankly, I don't know if that's the case. But basically, the way that it goes is the very end of the book, okay? Rick and Cliff and Jim Stacy are chilling at a bar. They're relaxing at a bar after the long day of shooting the Lancer pilot. And effectively what ends up happening is they get into a conversation with the piano player at the bar. And the piano player is a big fan of Rick. So Rick agrees to sign an autograph, sign something dedicated to the piano player's son. And the piano player's son's name is Quentin. So what Tarantino has effectively done is have one of his characters sign a fictional autograph to himself. And I mean, that's kind of cool, I guess. It's nice and meta. I can appreciate that. But at what point does it stop being, oh, cutesy, you know, he's plugging himself? At what point does it stop being that and start just becoming ego? I don't know. But all in all, I really enjoyed the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood book. It's a very swift read. It took me 2 days to finish. And frankly, I mean, I'll keep this copy around. I may read it again sometime. I mean, I'm definitely going to go through and highlight all the fucking movies I haven't seen because, Jesus Christ, listening to Tarantino name movies for 400 pages made me feel like a goddamn idiot. But all in all, I guess I enjoyed the book. It's not better than the movie, not by any stretch of the imagination. I appreciate some of what was put in there. For example, painting Rick as an undiagnosed bipolar was a very interesting turn and a very, actually, it makes sense. The inclusion of Aldo Ray in a brief scene, that was one of the best scenes in the entire book. But overall, I'm talking from start to finish, it was fine. I mean, it was, I'd say it was worth the $8 that I paid for it to purchase it on Amazon. At the end of the day, if you're a fan of the movie, you should read the book. If you're a fan of Tarantino, you should read the book. But if you're not either of those things, frankly, I don't see why you would. It's just a pure fan service companion piece to, frankly, one of Tarantino's most controversial movies. I would recommend this book to any Tarantino fans, but pretty much not to anyone else. If I had to rate it, I mean, I don't review or critique books. I'm not a critic by any stretch of the imagination, but if I were to rate it, I guess I would give it a 6 out of 10. Little more good than bad, but overall, dead center for me. So, yeah, that's it for this video. If you all enjoyed it, be sure to hit that like button, hit subscribe, be sure to leave a comment. I just want to thank you all so much for the absolute growth that the channel has experienced as of late. I mean, it's been blowing my mind. I went from 52 subscribers a few weeks ago to over 500, and that's absolutely insane. Welcome to all of you. You all mean so much to me. Thank you to everyone who's stuck around for my new videos. I'm really having a lot of fun making them. And, yeah, I mean, let's just keep on going, man. I mean, I love making video essays. The podcast isn't totally dead yet. It's still going. Just stay tuned for that. It'll probably be going directly to Spotify now. I don't think I'll be uploading on YouTube anymore. But I'll leave a link in the description if you want to listen to the podcast. And yeah, thank you all for watching. Peace.